Welcome to this special edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. You know, so much is going on in Washington, D.C. today as it relates to the National Guard and more federal agents on the streets of D.C. People talking about that crime numbers were manipulated, the true story about the drop in crime. The true numbers were not there. This is coming from people who are on the inside. It's coming from the president of the union. But what are the facts? So what is really going on in D.C.? One thing we know for certain, I was away in Alaska, and when I came back to D.C., this is no joke, there was something in the air I'd never felt before. But it was so dark, I had to wait up until I got up the next morning, went to Union Station, I saw the tanks, but let me tell you, I didn't see the homelessness, I didn't see the drugs. I saw a new DC. It was just a new DC. And you know what I realized? We have become so conditioned believing that we should live in fear, that we should look forward to our cars being hijacked. We can look forward to people lurking in the dark, waiting on us to go to our car to assault us, waiting on people to steal and do whatever they want to do. That these young kids have no boundaries, and these kids are smart. Let me be clear to you. They know law enforcement better than law enforcement. They know exactly what they can get away with, and they have pursued an agenda of destruction and torment to the people of D.C. But finally, Daddy came home. You know what happens when Daddy comes home? When Daddy's been away, well, Daddy Trump came home. And Daddy Trump said, I'm gonna call him Daddy because he's a man. And that's a mark of respect. A man came home and said, you know what? This craziness of tormenting people's lives, intimidating them, robbing from them, making them fearful. They can't go out and exercise. They cannot run. They're suffering from mental illness. They can't have real connection with their communities. And they are depressed. Has to change. And all of a sudden, D.C. has changed. But don't take my word for it. I got Derrick Parks, who's president of Metropolitan Protective Services, and Marcus Moore, who was a Capitol Hill police officer for over a decade, Leonard Snipes, who's a crime statistician expert, and Bruce Fein, who's a constitutional law expert. I want you to explain. I want you to, Derrick, I'm gonna start with you, because people really need to understand what's going on. Because let me tell you why we're having this conversation today. Because we feel so safe. Because you see me cover the Capitol, you see me cover the White House, you see me cover the courts, and what do you always see? Nothing but security. They don't have to worry about going to work, waiting on somebody to break in or snatch their pocketbooks, hijack their cars on Capitol grounds and White House grounds. Why? Because they have security. And I said to myself, why can't people of D.C. have the same, not just D.C., what about Memphis? What about Dallas? What about Philadelphia? New York City? What about all across the country? Why can't your taxpayer dollars assure the same for you? Why can't you feel the way we're feeling today in Washington, D.C.? Talk about the D.C. before and the D.C. now.
Sure, thank you for the question. Well, definitely what we've seen in D.C. and a lot of my properties that we secure around the city, from formerly the Wharf and to National Harbor, a spike in crime, juvenile crime especially. I know when I was on the street as a police officer, the lookouts we would look out for was between the ages of 19 and 25. But now the ages seem to be between 12 and 19. So what we've seen is a crazy explosion of juvenile crime that has plagued the city. And I know Pam Smith, the chief of DC Police Department, has had her hands full trying to come up with creative ways to try to mitigate the crime and the crime spree in DC. So one of the things that I've seen and that I really appreciate that this administration has done is deployed an additional 1,000 federal officers to help suppress and neutralize crime. And I think when we look at what the goals are, is to kind of restore the city to where it should be. This is the nation's capital. This is the most powerful city in the world. And we should be safe to be able to walk, whether you're walking on Capitol Hill or whether you're going somewhere in far southeast DC. We all should have a certain level of safety that we should not concern ourselves with. And citizens of this community should be able to go outside and not have their cars broken into or be robbed.
Marcus, as a former Capitol Hill police officer, what is the noted change for you? And what about the crime stats that there are those they refuse to, they continue to refute and dispute, saying they're being overly exaggerated by this administration. Even though someone from the union, former law enforcement officers have said that the books have been cooked, people don't realize just how out of control crime is in the city. And listen, the mayor is a law and order mayor. She does the best she can, but she has a progressive city council that fights her at every turn.
Thank you for having me on, Armstrong. And one of the biggest things that I've noticed is, like you mentioned earlier, just a much quieter city right now. You know, at nighttime we don't hear any fireworks, we don't hear any gunshots or anything like that. And just with that alone, you know, I always go back to the broken windows theory. When you suppress and control a lot of the major crimes, the small petty crimes tend to stop. And that's what I've seen. That's the biggest thing that I've seen. In terms of the books being cooked, so to speak, I have heard that you know, with law enforcement getting out there, these things have not been stopped. Major crimes have still been committed. Just alone where my parents live, it's a local elementary school. It's been, I think, 5 shootings within the past 30 days. And so the residents of Washington, D.C. don't feel like a lot of these major violent crimes have been stopped and suppressed.
What about this narrative that businesses are being impacted by law enforcement? People are not coming to restaurants, people are not going to museums. What is the reality of that, Derrick?
Well, the reality of the situation is a lot of Washingtonians who actually live in Washington, D.C. and that's grew up in Washington, D.C., I think there is a slight level of fear, right? And the fear that they probably experience is they won't want to get caught up in some of the roadblocks and things of that nature. So the idea of going out right now is it's kind of like people are timid. But I think things, once they realize that law enforcement is targeting the individuals that need to be targeted, I think we'll start to see a return of everybody being able to enjoy the safe streets of D.C.
Talk about the stop and seizure, the roadblocks, why that's important as it relates to drugs and
Sure.
firearms coming in and out of the city.
Yeah, so one of the things that is a tool that police officers use and this law enforcement community use is to actually have these impacts on roadblocks and things of that nature. And what happens is when they're doing those cursory stops, they're able to check, verify that tags and registrations are going, you know, that they're assigned to the individuals that they should be assigned to, whether a car has tint, whether, you know, individuals are acting out. The one thing that I have noticed is that a lot of times in law enforcement, there's 2 models that we go by, and that's the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And it seems like at this particular juncture, the law enforcement that's been deployed are going exactly with what we call the letter of the law. So if you're outside drinking and, you know, normal footbeat officers may tell you pour that out, you know, go on about your way, we seeing arrests being made in these particular situations. So I think with what's going on now, that will have a mental effect on individuals that would commit crime, or what we call crimes against community. So basically loitering, smoking, things of that nature. And we've seen this through another administration in New York. When Rudy Giuliani got in office, the one thing he had his officers focus on was the crimes of life. So vagrancy, loitering, and things of that nature. And when you clean that out, you were able to focus on the big crimes. And we've seen him clean New York City up by using these same strategies and tactics.
You know, it's not a fair narrative that the mayor is fighting the president on the changes that he's trying to make D.C. She just doesn't want the Drug Enforcement Agency, COLE, to have supervision over her law enforcement and over her chief of police, Pam Smith. She does not want to lose the authority of the district. She's always said that she's fought against the city council. So it's not that she's fighting against Trump. In fact, you don't even hear Trump criticize her. It's just a balance. She has to balance out of the respect that she has for her citizens that elect her, and also appreciating the power that the president has and the resources that he can also provide to help her in her fight against crime.
I definitely agree, Armstrong. And with that said, you know, with what she's put in place, you know, the officers are trying every day. When the whole defund the police movement came out, you had a lot of officers within MPD just said, you know what, my hands are tied. I can't really do my job the way I feel. And you said, not like, just like you said, not because of the mayor, but just because a lot of the oversight from the DC council. And so when you have that in place, and a lot of officers just taking their hands off the situation, crime goes rampant. However, I feel like DC and DC's labor union, they're saying they're reclaiming their city. They're getting their city back by any means necessary, and that comes through bringing 1,000 federal law enforcement agents, officers here, as well as the National Guard, and I agree with it.
So let me come back to you, Leonard. I mean to you, Parks. Explain to those that are watching what it means when you have this additional support and what eventually happens when it's no longer there. But what does it mean now? What does it do for law enforcement? What does it do for these neglected communities like Southeast? Because privately, many of these citizens are thankful that they feel safe and secure in their neighborhoods. Sure. What does that mean?
Well, one of the things that we've been trained in the police department was we like to use overwhelming force to neutralize the threat, right? So if it's one person, we want to have 5. And what we've seen is when we see these officers deployed, they're usually in groups of 6 or 7 or better. And so that gives them the confidence and knowing that they have the backup to be able to approach a situation. Unfortunately, a lot of times when you see beat cops and they're walking the beat, it's usually 2 officers walking, and you might run across 5 or 6 juveniles or 7, and they're outnumbered. So by them walking in these larger groups and being able to neutralize crime and address crime, it gives every officer the confidence to be able to execute their job as designed.
You know, I tell you what I found fascinating. Law enforcement is now showing a lot of these youth, the National Guard, a lot of them sit on top of the tank, sitting on the passenger side. And these kids are saying, I never knew I could get this close to law enforcement. And then they also said, I had friends of mine shot 3 days in a row right here in this neighborhood near the Navy Yard. It's also letting the young people realize that law enforcement is not their enemy. They could be their friend. But listen, they're losing loved ones as well.
Absolutely.
Because they have no idea right and from wrong. The parents can't do anything with them. They're running the household. So they've got to have some kind of example that this behavior is wrong and it has to stop.
I agree. I mean, the reality of the situation is we have to have fear-based respect. Once fear-based respect, if kids are not respecting and fear their parents, then law enforcement, teachers, and anyone they come in contact with is doomed, right? Because as we grow and from kids to childhood, we fear our parents, whether it's, you're going to do your homework, you're going to go to school, but once those barriers are not feared or respected, then it's doomed. It's a much more of a challenge for teachers, law enforcement, and regular citizens because these kids have no fear. And unfortunately, the pendulum has swung so far to the left that we have to make these provocative measures to bring it back center again.
One last thing before we go to break. Imagine other people around the country who live in this fear watching this. This could have a snowball effect across America if this works.
Yes. Yes, it could. And I think that one of the things that I guess what has to be, worked through is what's the numbers, right? Because again, any city can be locked down. Any city can have a plethora of law enforcement officers, but now we have to figure out what that balance is, right? And one of the challenges with whether it's mayor or governor or what that is there's a budget that's in place. Now, luckily, in this particular situation, the mayor of DC has the power of the president backing her, and they have unlimited budget, unlimited funds to be able to neutralize these crimes. So there is a complete benefit to having this kind of tandem work ethic to try to suppress the crime and neutralize the chaos that's been plaguing the city.
And I also believe that the president knows that if it can work in Washington, D.C., it can work in any other major city in the nation.
Mm-hmm. And we'll be back. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away. Before we go to Bruce and Leonard, you were telling a story about one of your favorite movies, Mississippi Burning, and Gene Hackman. Tell that story.
Well, there's a famous scene in the story where Gene Hackman expressed his feeling to his FBI counterpart, and what he said was, the counterpart said, "I refuse to get in the gutter to fight this." And Gene Hackman's response was, "If the fight is in the gutter, then that's where we must go. It's the only way we're going to win this fight."
And so we're in the gutter, Leonard Snipes. Leonard, why does public fear remain so high despite the so-called falling crime numbers?
Well, I'm not quite sure the numbers are falling. You can make any case for the District of Columbia you want in terms of crime. You can make any case you want in terms of national numbers. But we have 65% of DC residents basically saying that they are very or extremely concerned about crime. I mean, if you just threw in the concept of concern, you would push that up to, instead of 65%, 75 or 85%. So it's clear that the citizens of the District of Columbia are concerned about crime. If you take a look at national numbers, we have near record numbers per Gallup in terms of fear of crime throughout the country. Now, if you want me to get into the DC crime statistics, I can easily do that. Second in the country for rates of homicide for cities of their size. DC was ranked fourth in overall homicides. Homicides basically correlate with crime across the board. So I can go down my list.
Please,
DC,
break it down. Break it down for us.
Break it down?
Well, listen, how do personal experiences in high crime areas shape citywide perceptions, Leonard?
People feel, see, taste, smell what's going on in their neighborhoods. They don't give a damn about crime statistics. They go by what they see, they go by what they experience, they go by what they are experiencing, their friends are experiencing, and their families are experiencing. So it could be disorder, it could be graffiti, it could be kids hanging out on the street corner. They're going to say to themselves, this is dangerous, I'm concerned about this. But when you have a 65% very or extremely serious polling numbers from the Washington Post in terms of crime in DC, it's giving every indication that people are really becoming afraid about being in DC.
What are your thoughts about what's happening now after the president decided to bring in the National Guard? You have other states giving additional personnel, and the DC Metropolitan Police Force is on board. I'm telling you, I walk outside now, it's the first time ever, I'm not smelling no marijuana. I've not smelled marijuana in days.
Yeah. Well, look, the president wants to send a message to the rest of the country, not just to the District of Columbia, that this is something that we're going to do in the District of Columbia. This is something you should do within your city. It's pretty clear to me that this is not just DC, but this is a symbolic effort for the rest of the country. And he wants mayors throughout the rest of the country to start taking a look at what he's doing in DC and to emulate that effort. So this goes far beyond the District of Columbia. All I'm saying is that in terms of statistics, you can take any statistic you want and make any case you want for crime in DC. But there are plenty of indices. There's a European index saying that Washington, D.C. is one of the most dangerous cities in the world.
Well, let me ask you, how does this bode when you talk about Washington, D.C.? They say, well, Baltimore is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. They say Memphis is one of the most dangerous places in the world. They say Chicago is one of the most dangerous places in the world. And then San Francisco, and then Philadelphia. Are all American major cities dangerous?
We have a problem with crime in cities. You started off with the idea, Armstrong, that cities have become used to their level of crime. Cities have become complacent. Cities are simply accepting of what's going on in their community. It seems normal to them. And that's the thing that we've got to get away from, is the idea that, safety is paramount to, our children being raised properly, school scores, economic development, jobs. They're all dependent upon perceptions, not necessarily crime numbers, but perceptions of crime. You don't invest in communities that have, that you deem to be dangerous. And that applies to Baltimore and every other city in America. So the sense is that until citizens feel comfortable within their own communities, they're going to either leave or they're going to take extraordinary measures. I have never seen a city in my life anywhere in the country, and per the federal government, I've been to high crime areas throughout the country. Bars on windows, bars on doors in the District of Columbia. I've never seen any city that has sections of their city where there are bars on every door. There are bars on every window. The citizens of the District of Columbia are scared to death of what's happening in their city. They just feel that it's politically incorrect to articulate it, except to the Washington Post when they're saying 65% believe that crime is very or extremely serious.
How do media narratives amplify fear or understanding of crime trends, Leonard?
Well, the crime trends and fear, they're two different things. People really don't pay attention to crime stats. So somebody can say, which is true, that crime went down last year in the District of Columbia 35%. We have a national analyst who said it's 9% because of definitional issues. So somebody can come along and say, well, crime went down 35% in the District of Columbia. But when you have crime being ranked second in the country for homicides, for their size city, fourth overall, seventh amongst the 30 cities with violence, having European indexes saying it's one of the most dangerous cities in the world. I mean, it could go on and on and on. People don't pay attention to those statistics. People, what they go by is by what they fear, what they taste, what they smell, what they feel. And if they feel that the situation is dangerous, they're going to say so through Washington Post polls saying that 75%, 65% are saying it's extremely or very dangerous, or they're very concerned. So, we have basically a city afraid, but this sense of a city afraid can be applied to Baltimore, can be applied to Memphis, can be applied to Kansas City, it can be applied to any other city in the country. And until we get this under control, economic development is going to be challenged. School scores are going to be challenged. I'm looking at a statistic talking about homicides in the District of Columbia compared to world cities, and it is just by far, in terms of juvenile homicides rather, by far outstrips most cities in the world. So you can make any case you want based upon the statistics. I can either tell you that DC is extremely dangerous or crime went down 35% last year. It's your choice to what stats you believe, but the stats are meaningless in terms of the average citizen. It's what they feel.
Bruce Fein, what powers does the president have to continue what he's doing in our nation's capital versus how he can also impact and shape cities across America?
Well, the Home Rule Statute of 1973 is the decisive document. It provides authority for the president to find emergency conditions in the District of Columbia. And if he makes that finding, then he can utilize federal forces in order to protect federal non-local interests. That in this case would mean federal buildings, federal officers, and immigration. But the statute does not permit him to utilize federal resources for local law enforcement. And that is the de facto decision that was rendered by a district court when at least Mr. Trump and his attorney general initially replaced the DC police commissioner with a federal official and saying, we are taking over the entire department, whether it relates to local law enforcement or immigration or otherwise. Right now, the status quo is that the federal forces and the contributions made by the 4 states you referenced can be utilized for immigration purposes and for protecting federal buildings and federal officials, but not beyond that. Now, sometimes there can be a blend because there may be cases where local law enforcement protects federal buildings and officers. But anyway, that is the current legal landscape. There's going to be probably another ruling coming this week. And that's why it's a little premature, I believe, to suggest that the reductions in crime, the atmospherics that you've described, are attributable to what Mr. Trump has done, at least directly. Now, I think indirectly, what he has done is encouraged the DC local officials to step up their game against juvenile crime, even if it's not at the direction of Mr. Trump, because they understand the public mood, the one that you've actually described on your program. And so indirectly, what Mr. Trump has done is really to have much stricter local law enforcement than obtained previous to his emergency declaration, which is all to the good, in my judgment. I do think that instead of thinking about Mississippi burning, I think about West Side Story and G. Officer Krupke, where the lyrics basically satirize the idea that all youth crime is due to people who had bad parents, that the youths have neuroses, they're all psychologically disturbed, and that's why they resort to crime. And I think that was a proper satire. During the 1960s, when West Side Story went its heyday, the crime rate soared because there is no sense of accountability. I don't think that there's just a magic wand that's going to resolve this issue. One thing that has to be focused on: where are the kids' parents? Why did the kids have parents having children and they have no responsibility for them? They just let them loose like wild dogs. There has to be some sense of responsibility. If you don't want to raise your kids properly, don't have kids. No one's forcing you to have the kids. And that is not something that can be forced by a law, but it has to be a cultural norm. It has to be an ethical norm whereby people get ostracized if they do that. And ostracism sometimes can be even more important than the law itself. Anyway, that's where we are. And I certainly agree with all the sentiments here that suggest, listen, the law isn't perfect, but my gosh, accountability means something, and it affects behavior. And Machiavelli once said, better to be feared than loved, if you have to choose between the two. And if it's a matter of protecting other people's safety and lives, I'm all in favor of more fear than love. And that's just the way that the world works.
And we will be back with much more.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. And welcome back to the broadcast. So Derrick, this is what I want you to try to help us understand. Given your law enforcement background, your Metropolitan Protective Services, where you provide security to different buildings around this city. You've got ICE, you got the FBI, you got the Metropolitan Police Department, you got the DEA, and you have states that are sending resources here. It's not as if these different law enforcement agencies have been sitting around looking for something to do, and they all do different things, and the president is pulling resources away from these areas. How do you create a model from all these resources? Because FBI agents are certainly not foot soldiers like the Metropolitan Police on the ground. That's not their expertise. But how do you take what we're seeing now and not only make it work for a city like Washington, D.C., but a model for the country?
Well, I think that's going to be one of the challenges. One of the challenges is the fact that for this emergency, the president has pulled officers or agents from their assignments to redeploy them to handle this crime spike. And so I think one of the challenges is through his administration and through the administrations of these federal agencies is how do you sustain this situation ongoing and being able to duplicate that in other areas without pulling from the primary focus of, for example, the FBI to investigate crime or the DEA to go after drug enforcement and things of that nature. So I think that's something that has to have a conversation. If we're looking at a long-term solution and a sustainability, and further if we're looking at duplicating this in other cities.
You know, one of the things, Bruce, we don't talk about enough is just how sophisticated, clever these young adults are. Even though they may be 18, 14, 20, they understand law enforcement, they understand what they can get away with, they understand the laws, and they sit back. And so when someone like the governor of Maryland say, we're not going to ever have the National Guard, that's not coming to Maryland, these criminals will realize that we can't stay in D.C., so we got to go somewhere.
Yeah, well, that's true. They'll shop for the most lenient jurisdiction, and unfortunately, there are many of them that are present. Justice Holmes once described law from the bad man's view, which I think is the view taken by the juveniles. It's not a moral issue. It's what's the likelihood I'll be caught and punished if I do X? And they're very, very clever at knowing what the rules are. Even Supreme Court decisions saying certain use cannot be subject to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Very difficult in some jurisdictions to try juveniles as adults. Adult gangs oftentimes recruit juveniles because if the juvenile commits the crime, they get out on probation, shields the adults from accountability. But it's wrong, in my judgment, to suggest that these youths are not very, very astute when it comes to assessing what are the likely consequences of their behavior. It's just like it's said that youths involved in drug trafficking, they know what the buy and the sell price are. They may not know mathematics, but they know whether a drug is being overpriced. And I think it's wrong to assign this kind of warped, diminished ability to think to these youths. They understand very clearly, like any child does. If you do X, you get punished, then you stop doing X. It's not very, very complicated whatsoever. It goes back to the Bible. Spare the rod, spoil the child.
So Leonard, what reforms beyond policing are needed to address the root causes of crime?
Well, one of your guests said it a little while ago, and that's the family. You know, when you take a look at juveniles caught up in the criminal justice system, the rates of brain damage are off the charts. When you take a look at females involved in crime, especially young females, the history of sexual abuse against them as children is astronomical. The fact that these individuals have been abused by their own parents, neglected by their own parents, violence is common. The fact that they are victims of crime is extremely common. So somehow, some way, we've got to come to grips with the fact that if you give a damn about kids, if you really care about children, somehow, some way, we have to persuade parents and communities to police themselves and parents to take care of their own kids. We shouldn't be slapping the dickens out of our children. What we should be doing is embracing them, make sure they do well in school, hugging them, putting them to bed at night, making sure that they're taken care of. That's not happening in today's society, and it's profoundly sad. I've talked to hundreds of people caught up in the criminal justice system who tell me that violence is good, that violence is something that is in their best interest, something that protects them, their families, their property. I mean, where in the name of God do you have people, young people, looking me straight in the eye and going, Mr. Sipes, violence is a good thing?
You know, Marcus, I listened to Leonard talk about the parents. You know, I know parents, both in the household, They may have 5 or 6 children with the best example, the best resources, the best models. Some of those kids are going to do drugs, they're going to do alcohol, they're going to do some of the craziest things in the world, no matter what the teachings are in the household. I've always believed that unless a parent is an accessory to the crime, a benefit from the crime, that parent should not be punished, especially to take that parent out of a household where they're still raising the children. That leads to more destruction, not only of that family, of the community. And also, a lot of these homes are without fathers. So these mothers are not running the households. They're more afraid of the kids than the community itself. And so with that in mind, what is the model? What do you need to do? What should be the punishment for these juveniles? Because listen, we all know that 85 or 90% of them will get it right. They can be rehabilitated. But it's just 5 or 6% that do the majority of the crimes. They repeat those crimes. What should happen with them?
Well, that's a good point, Armstrong, that you're making, that it's just a small amount committing the majority of the crimes. Also, in D.C., recidivism, I think the last time I checked is at 70% with juveniles coming back onto the streets and committing the same exact crimes on what they went in there for. Secondly, also, juveniles are being undercharged right now. We could say we could punish the parents. However, just like Mr. Sipes mentioned, or just like you mentioned, if you take those parents out of the household, now we have a bigger problem. But I think once this justice system begins to punish properly and stop necessarily putting slaps on the wrist, I think kids will come back out and they'll understand, hey, I won't do that again, or I'll go somewhere else where I can't get away with this same crime.
So, Derrick, what is the proper punishment? Should we look to judges? Are they too lenient? Should we look to the issue of bail? What should we look to? What should that punishment look like?
Well, I think we have to, I think one of the guests said, spare the rod, spoil the child. I believe that and believe in that wholeheartedly. I think one of the things as we try to repair the city in some of the juvenile activity and juvenile crime, we also got to look at what options do we have them to decompress, if you will, right? So what kind of, I don't want to say programs, but what other youth things that they can put that energy into, opposed to just causing havoc throughout the city. So I think a part of the approach has to be a firm, strong justice. But I think for those other individuals who are kind of borderline, we got to give some kind of I don't know whether it's the Boys and Girls Club, whether it's some other activities that they can be a part of, where they can actually now see some hope in their future, and now they can start gravitating towards more positive and productive things.
Leonard, we have about 2 minutes left before we continue with Bruce and our next guest. Are there any models from across this country that DC and the rest of the country can look to for guidance that actually work and they're not confronted with this issue?
I can tell you from literature reviews where you take a look at well-done research, it's basically proactive policing. Most of the data on programs for individuals, and I'm all for programs for individuals from a religious point of view, from a moral point of view, but they don't do very much in terms of reducing recidivism. The bottom line is the parents. The bottom line is the community. It's not cops. It's not the criminal justice system. The bottom line is getting parents to raise their kids properly and communities to raise. The whole concept of the fact that it takes a village, they're correct.
But the problem is, before I interrupt you, is that a lot of these kids are kids themselves raising children. They were never raised.
Right.
Of course, yeah, that's a big part of the problem. Throw all the programs at them that you possibly can. Again, from a religious, moral point of view, that's the thing that we should be doing. It's just that it hasn't been very successful in terms of reducing recidivism. When you have kids so beaten up, so traumatized by life, so traumatized by their own family situation, so traumatized by their own communities, by the time they get to school, by the time they get to us in the criminal justice system, many of these kids are lost until they age out of crime. I'm not saying putting them all in prison. We don't have the prison space to put them all in prison. There's got to be programs for offenders or just people caught up or close to being caught up in the criminal justice system. I'm all for trying to take care of our kids, but parents better damn do better at raising their own children.
You know, I must say, this is one of the best discussions on this issue that we've had. So Leonard, Marcus, Derrick, thank you so much. Bruce and I are coming back. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
And welcome back to the broadcast. Ms. Norwich, thank you so much for joining us, Hilary. You wanted to, in listening to the last segment, there's a comment you wanted to make, so please.
Yes, Armstrong, thank you for indulging me. So I was a single mother. I've raised 3 children. I always say 90% financially, logistically, emotionally alone. And I was always very concerned that they would turn out well, that they wouldn't be criminals. And it was very difficult because I was a very much working mother. I was golfing with a chap one day, and he said to me, you know, Hilary, I have been counseling in prisons for 27 years. And he said, there's one common characteristic of every single prisoner I've ever counseled, because he was a very religious man. He said, doesn't matter what socioeconomic background, doesn't matter what religion they are, doesn't matter what race they are. He said, one common characteristic of every convict. And I said, what is it? What is it? And he said, I'm going to tell you this as a mother. Just make sure your children feel so loved that they'd never let you down. Okay. Can I tell you something? Every time I go anywhere and there's some lovely young person and somebody, you know, sometimes they're a wait staff or sometimes they're helping, and I'll actually, sometimes they give you a big smile and they welcome you and they're lovely no matter where you are. I'll say to them, I know something about you. And they go, "Bull." And I say, you feel very loved, don't you? You felt very loved as a child. And they'll look at me and sometimes they'll say, oh, my grandmother raised me. Or sometimes they say, yeah, isn't that interesting? He said no criminal, no convict in that prison felt loved. There wasn't someone that they were letting down.
You know, it's fascinating because you know what? They are playing out something even deeper that they did not get in their childhood. And this is why they join gangs. Sometimes the least common denominator, because they wanted to have something to belong to.
Well, and that's like feeling loved almost.
Yes, and a lot of these older adults exploit them, use them for their criminal enterprise.
Because they know that they need that feeling of feeling like a belonging, a love, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. You know, how has global power shifted away from Europe toward America in recent decades?
Oh, that's a huge question. How many years do you have for me to discuss this? But just in a nutshell, I think we saw something extremely interesting in the recent summit. What we saw with all those European leaders coming here, Armstrong, is that there was a time when certainly everybody would have convened around, certainly in Great Britain, or they would have gone somewhere else, and that all those European leaders flew here and they came to our White House. We have seen really a massive shift. Of course, it started after the Second World War, but I thought this was a great signal of how important it is for global leaders to come to the White House. You saw Two-Tier Keir coming, and you also saw Mark Rutte. He is no fool. He is the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands. He ran a government that was a constant coalition. He was able to bring forces together. And some of the things that he said about the fact that this couldn't have happened and didn't happen under any administration, I think that's what you're seeing that's really, really shifted.
What do you think are the key events that have solidified America's position now as the dominant leader in the world?
Well, one of them is this. It's money, of course. I've always said this. Could you imagine saying to a British taxpayer, a French taxpayer, a German taxpayer, a Finnish taxpayer, or any taxpayer in Europe, could you imagine saying to them, we want you to spend millions of your tax dollars, tax income, EU, we want you to spend millions of your money to defend the US southern border. what would they say? They'd be like, that's ridiculous, right?
It is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And yet you just think about it, you as a taxpayer, Armstrong, one of the things you've been paying for, and every member of our audience that's ever paid taxes, you're actually paying for the defense of Europe. So I think the fact that Donald Trump has actually said, you must go from your 2%, which a lot of them didn't pay, by the way. The UK always has, and so has Poland, and some of the Eastern European countries, but Germany didn't, France didn't, that he said they need to pay 5%. Of course they need to pay 5% of their GDP. This is in their backyard. So now getting to your question, bringing the 2 points together here, my point and your question. It's about money. The US has really been, when Mark Rutte referred to Donald Trump as daddy, we've been like the sugar daddy for the whole world. That's been a big, big issue. Now, some of that's being pulled back. We're making them behave. That is the money. Now we're making them behave because they want to come to us to do business with us. Whoever was responsible for doing all of those trade deals for decades should be ashamed of themselves. They were selling out America. So what Donald Trump's done, he's managed to make them pay more, which is fantastic. So it's not just about our money. And he's shifted the degree of power, saying, this is where you want to sell, because we're the greatest consumers in the world. Now you're going to have to come to us. And that's what's changed.
You know, one of the things that Netanyahu and President Trump has said, that Europe must get its immigration policies under control. It's so self-destruct. What do you say to the UK and France and others who refuse to hear the alarm bell?
Armstrong, I would call it actually, and I was in England just very recently before I actually was in Israel, was there with Netanyahu and Ambassador Huckabee and President Herzog. I was in the UK, I was actually with GB News in the UK, and the comment that I heard a lot was faded glory. You should see the dilapidation of so many towns, the state of the roads, things that weren't like that when I lived there. The money is going to house these migrants, and my comment on that is, we fought 2 world wars, especially the Second World War, to keep the Germans out. Could you even imagine not only letting the Nazis in, worse, giving them 4-star hotels, free meals, and cell phones on the beaches when they came? This is literally an invasion. It's an invasion. And Donald Trump, as we know, has stopped the illegals coming in on our southern border. It is mind-boggling, Armstrong, not just to let them in, but also to provide such services for them. And I will say this, the tide is beginning to turn in the UK. A lot of these, there is some kind of global force at work. I can't speak to things I don't know the answer to, but these protests are organized. You were talking about crime in the last segment, and one of the things was at Union Station the other day, when Pete Hegseth went down there with J.D. Vance, what happened? There were these protesters that were against making DC safe again. And they were older people, and I saw pictures of them when I was in DC that day. I saw photographs. They were like 99% older white people. They must have been busting from somewhere, because the demographic of Washington, D.C. is 53% black or Hispanic. Who were these people that want crime in D.C.? So in the UK, same thing as D.C. people that want to have a safe city themselves. In the UK, there were protests against the migrants in the hotels, and they weren't organized. Why? For once, all the banners were different. They were local people with cardboard things that looked completely homemade. You look at a lot of these protests in the US, there's some kind of organized force.
Well, of course there are. Let me ask you, why was it necessary for all the European leaders to come here this week to give support to Zelensky? And what are we missing here in terms of finding a peaceful solution to the war between Ukraine and Russia?
Why were they here? They were here because they wanted to make sure that Zelensky did the right thing, and they wanted to show unified support. Europe, don't forget, is 27 countries. There is no Europe. One of the things that Henry Kissinger once said was, I'll believe in a Europe when I have one phone number to call. They're 27 nations, Armstrong, completely diverse interests, right? They wanted to show a degree of a united force by Zelensky. That's why they were here. So number one, that's why they were here. Now, how do you find a solution? First of all, if it was that easy, everybody else would have done it. It's not for me to say, but what I will say is there's only 3 things Putin cares about. The letter from Melania was really lovely about those 19,000 children that had been taken hostage. That was a lovely letter. I think it was the right thing to do because all the networks were talking about it. I was on Sky News Australia talking about it, GB News talking about it, so the world knew about it. Very good thing to do. But that's not what Putin cares about. He sent 20,000 Russians to their death last month. So he doesn't care about his own people. He doesn't care about the children. 3 things he cares about. He cares about his economy, because if it collapses, that makes him look bad. He cares about a diplomatic solution where he doesn't look like a loser. Which man would raise a hand and say, make me look like a loser? And he doesn't want a military defeat, which makes him look like a loser. No man raises their hand and says, I want to look like a loser. Those are the three things that he wants. The question is, how do you give him those three things without giving up all of Ukraine? Unfortunately, he went into Crimea under President Obama and nothing was done about it, and I think Crimea is basically gone. And he's going to get part of that eastern core, the Donbass region and some of those regions in the east, because the only agreement that works is when both sides aren't happy.
So, finally, can Putin be trusted?
No. No. But I think one of the things that President Trump, I don't know this, I'm going to take a guess. This is a guess. I always like to specify what's a guess and what I think is a fact. This is a guess. I will bet you, not publicly, but President Trump is no fool. I bet he basically sort of said to him quietly, if you don't make some kind of agreement, we will destroy your economy. Because don't forget, President Trump is in dialogue with Moody in India, and they're purchasing all this Russian oil. The Russian oil, Armstrong, is what has funded this entire world. Without them selling Russian oil, this war would never have happened.
What's going to happen in the minute we have left between Israel and Gaza?
Oh, in the long run, Muslims breed 8 to 1, and they are going to be, in 2050, they're going to be 32% of the world population, and Christians will be 32% of the world population. In 2060, they'll be the dominant religion. In the long run, Muslims will be the dominant religion in the world, and I fear for the future of Israel. In the short term, meaning the next few years, I think with President Donald Trump at the helm, I think we will see some kind of negotiated peace where Israel will get back their hostages, or maybe that's a hope.
You actually think Muslims will dominate the United States?
They breed 8 to 1. In 2060, they'll be the world dominant religion. Now, I don't know.
On my Facebook Live, I hear it all the time. Their greatest fear is Muslims taking over America. It's interesting that you said it. But Bruce, I didn't need you. You understand. She can handle her business. Thank you for joining us earlier. Listen, Heather, we've got to have you back on. You were excellent. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we're out of here.